unemployment insurance benefits without delay. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you so much. And it's just so important to note that about 37% of the people who receive these benefits have been searching for a job over 6 months. The very people that are going to be affected, 72,000 a week if this House doesn't act. So thank you so much, Representative. Appreciate it. I'd now like to yield some time to another colleague of mine, someone who has been a stalwart member of the Progressive Caucus, is the senior whip for the Democratic Caucus, and she's currently a member of the Judiciary Committee and the Homeland Security Committee, and a strong advocate for people who are trying to lift themselves out of poverty and find opportunity in America. It's my pleasure to yield some time to Representative Sheila Jackson-Lee.
Let me thank the gentleman for his kind leadership, because it is kind leadership, and I'm very privileged to be very proudly a member of the Progressive Caucus, serving as the Vice Chair liaison on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus to the Progressive Caucus and a member of the Executive Committee, and have watched this caucus take on hard issues. First, of course, issues that dealt with the idea of minimum wage and the underpayment, if you will, of federal contractors paying federal employees who are contracted to them. We have understood the distinction of the 99ers versus the 1% and waged a strong battle to make sure that the 99% were heard. So today I want to join the gentleman and say that time is running out. Just this week, as I indicated earlier today and the day before, those whose benefits were cut off on the 28th are receiving those notices or receiving empty mailboxes just in time for the end of the month and beginning of the month bills, whether it is one's mortgage or rent, whether it is the utilities that one has to pay, whether it is in care of one's elderly parent or children. I can assure you that the 1.3 million, 4,000 per week, 12,000 in Harris County, 66,000 in the state of Texas, are now confronting some very difficult times. Now, I think it should be known that when we say the term progressive, it is also a term that celebrates the greatness of America, its diversity, its opportunity and prosperity. I've not heard one of our members of the caucus in any way challenge prosperity, victory, success. In fact, I'm going to share with my colleagues that the Houston Chronicle put on the front page, sales of million-dollar homes snowball here. That gives a false image of America. Congratulate those citizens and families who are able, because of the greatness of this nation, because of the hard work of themselves and so many that contribute to the economy, because of the hard work of those who are now chronically unemployed or unemployed, who contributed to society and want to contribute to society, they're able to be prosperous. Good news for the real estate industry and my friends that are in that industry. Good news for small businesses. But that clouds the issue, and it allows people to falsely represent that all is well. The chronically unemployed number in the United States is higher than it's ever been. It's 2.6%, juxtaposed against a 7% unemployment rate. It varies across America. And so I want to join the gentleman with a very loud clarion voice, hopefully a voice of clarity, that you can have prosperity. We are a capitalistic society. There's good news in Houston. But at the same time, when I held an outreach press conference on December 31st, fearing the worst, that there was a full house of people looking for work, people telling their stories of how long they've looked for work, the sadness of not being able to find work, and the faith community joining in, and the social network community indicating they don't know how long they're going to last with this added numbers of individuals, food banks, emergency food stamps, and others. They didn't know how long they were going to last. It is imperative that we have within these hours movement by the other body, which we congratulate for making the first steps. But I would like to say this should be an emergency vote for a 3-month extension, and then the opportunity to go forward on a more deliberative analysis of how we can fund the rest of the time. And so I would hope we voted today. Democrats voted to extend the unemployment. I hope that the Progressive Caucus voice will be heard. I thank the gentleman because I want the 1.3 million and growing number to be able to have the same dignity as those who can celebrate the purchase of $1 million home, which we don't in any way challenge, but we realize that there are people who simply want to be able to make that rental payment or mortgage payment. They can do it. Though they're making ends meet, they can do it if we recognize the importance of giving them that transitional bridge past the unemployment insurance benefit now. And I yield back to the gentleman.
Thank you so much, Representative Jackson-Lee. And I think you so clearly explained the dilemma we have. While the economy is slowly bouncing back, and this president has brought us from a 9.8% unemployment rate he inherited down to 7%, and jobs are slowly being created, we still are noticing that there are people who are being left behind. And we have to recognize that as well. And I believe Secretary Robert Reich wrote a piece that appeared today that really explained that so well, that people are unfortunately, due to income inequality, the gap, the percentage of the people who are poor, who are working but still not earning enough, is still something we need to talk about as well. And thank you so much for that. Now I'd like to yield time to another one of my colleagues. This is another one of my freshman colleagues who, in fact, has been elected by our Democratic class as a freshman class president. He serves on the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, where he's the ranking member on the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Job Creation, and Regulatory Affairs, and also a member of the Committee on Natural Resources. It's my great honor to yield some time to Representative Matt Cartwright from Pennsylvania.
And I thank my valued and trusted colleague from Wisconsin for granting me this time. Mr. Speaker, I rise as a congressman from Pennsylvania, in fact, a congressman from Scranton, Pennsylvania, the birthplace of Secretary Robert Reich, I might add, somebody that we're very proud of, and I'm very proud myself to be a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And I rise here, Mr. Speaker, this evening to speak in support of a reasonable extension for UI benefits with no strings attached. And I say no strings attached because every time we have extended long-term UI benefits, we've done so with no strings attached. No political wrangling, no arm wrestling. No strings attached means no conditions whatsoever. It's the right thing to do because you have to do it in a situation like this. In fact, 5 times during the George W. Bush administration, this nation extended on UI benefits on an emergency basis with no strings attached, and I see no reason why we have to depart from this American precedent today. I understand, Mr. Speaker, the importance of fiscal responsibility. It's not like there's only one party that understands fiscal responsibility. We get that on this side of the aisle, and we get that in the Congressional Progressive Caucus as well. But the question is of timing. You know, we want to balance the budget. We want to pay down the national debt. We get why those things are important, and we know that UI benefits can't last forever. But the fact of the matter is, it's an emergency now. As our dear friend from the gentlelady from Texas just styled it, it is an emergency now. And the reason it's an emergency is the vast number of American citizens who are long-term unemployed. 1.3 million on December 28 got cut off. In my own district in northeastern Pennsylvania, over 6,000 families got cut off on December 28, 3 days after Christmas. And the fact of the matter is, this is not American tradition. Since 1959, we have never ended long-term UI benefits at a time when so many Americans are long-term unemployed. The gentlelady from Houston just mentioned it's 2.6% long-term unemployed in this country right now. Every other time we have cut off long-term UI benefits, it's been at a time when the people who are long-term unemployed are way less of a percentage. I think the previous highest percentage was 1.3%. In other words, half the percentage that we have now. Now is not the right time to cut off people from long-term UI benefits. And, Mr. Speaker, these are real people we're talking about. Before my voice entirely gives out, I want to read to you a letter I got from a lady named Carol Blankenhorn from Schuylkill Haven in Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania, which I proudly represent. Carol writes this: I am writing because I am a single unemployed mother that does not get any child support and have been supporting myself and my son up until my territory at my job was dissolved. I've been very diligent in my job search, but to no avail. I believed that I at least had 26 weeks of standard benefits, but the emergency extension is so crucial to me and others because of the poor economy and the lack of jobs. I have now received a notice of exhaustion for benefits in 3 weeks, she wrote in December, and I am devastated. I am not one of those people that are sitting back collecting. I couldn't live with myself. But now, as I sit and look at my son 1 week before Christmas, I am beside myself and have no idea how I am to survive. I am urging you to please extend and renew emergency federal extended unemployment benefits. In closing, I would ask you to please respond to me of your views and intentions on this very important issue. And that was Carol Blankenhorn, a real person from Schuylkill Haven, Pennsylvania. These are real people we're talking about, leaving aside the damage to the economy of stopping UI benefits at this point, leaving aside all of the economic realities that favor extending UI benefits. Remember, above all, we're talking about real people and real families, and that alone, in the dead of winter, is a great argument not to cut people off UI benefits at a time when it's next to impossible to find another job. And I yield back. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much, Representative Cartwright, again, for your not only your longtime advocacy on behalf of so many people, but especially for sharing the personal stories, because I think that really is what matters most. And thank you so much. Mr. Speaker, if I could ask, how much time is remaining?
The gentleman has 7 minutes remaining.
Thank you very much. I have all sorts of stories that I would read, but I don't have time to, from construction workers who are out of work and need these benefits, from machinists who are out of work, a surgical nurse in Baraboo, Wisconsin. There are so many people who need these benefits, and the very stories, like Representative Cartwright shared, I just have pages of these stories of people across the country who need these benefits to continue to get by while they're looking for work. They're not lazy, they're not sitting back, they want to work. And in this economy, they're doing everything they can to try to, but the economy is not just ready for some of these people, and we need to do everything we can. I do want to read one story. I had a chance this afternoon to meet with a constituent from Reedsburg, Wisconsin. She was recently the winner of Half and Ten's Our American Story 50th Anniversary of the War on Poverty Storytelling Contest. Her name is Amy Treptow, and she was here with her daughter, Anna. And I just want to read part of her story. She has benefited from programs that we have put together for people who are lower income. And what she says, and I'll read her words, "I've always worked hard and played by the rules, but I was still living on the brink of poverty. My story is the story of millions in today's economy in which there aren't enough jobs and or adequate training for the ones that are available. The basic need for more good jobs and training programs seems to be overlooked in today's conversation about poverty. I'm a veteran and a divorced mother with 2 children. I went to school to become an elementary school teacher, but wasn't able to find full-time employment, so I enrolled in a skills enhancement program at my local community action agency in Wisconsin. The program assists low-income adults that are working in a minimum of 20 hours a week to gain job skills in order to be able to have a job that pays a living wage with health benefits. I was working as a contract teacher making $15,184 a year, which is far below the poverty line for a family of 3. Once I enrolled in the program, I started to take coursework to get certified as a reading specialist. The program helped me with the tuition and other school expenses and provided me with case management services. I was also living in Section 8 housing and received housing counseling as well as participating in the agency's Family Self-Sufficiency Program. I am now a full-time employee with benefits as a reading specialist instructor, helping low-income children along with 2 other jobs, and I now own my own home. And she goes on. But by providing these safety nets, the very safety nets that we celebrated yesterday on the 50th year anniversary of the War on Poverty, we have helped someone like Amy and her family lift themselves out of poverty. But we have to do that right now in helping others. And I would like to, at this point, yield some time to my colleague from Illinois, someone who's been a mentor to me my entire career in the legislature, and so glad to serve with her now in Congress, a very staunch progressive, Representative Jan Schakowsky from the state of Illinois.
Well, I want to thank you, Representative Pocan, for...
Members are reminded not to traffic the well while another member is under recognition. The gentlelady from Illinois is recognized.
If that referred to me, I can't remember. I apologize. And again, thank you very much for organizing this hour for the Progressive Caucus. But you know, we're talking about human issues that really don't lend themselves to any kind of political label. We're talking about people, and I think this is what has hurt me so much, is the meanness. The meanness. You know, I just celebrated my 15th year here in the House of Representatives, and I have to tell you that we've disagreed across the aisle on a lot of different things, but the demonization of people who are struggling just to live a decent life. You know, we're talking about people who aren't, when we talk about the unemployed, aren't looking for this huge fancy job. They want to make enough to be able to raise their children comfortably, to be able to eat, put a roof over their head, just modest things that add up to a decent life. Aside from all the arguments on why it's really dumb economically to not extend those unemployment benefits, that it'll actually cost us jobs, 250,000, I don't know what the estimate is, if we don't put money in people's pockets that they can go out and spend. Why would things that used to have a bipartisan consensus not prevail today? You know, in 1959, 1962, 1973, 1977, 1985, 1994, and 2003, we extended unemployment insurance benefits until the level of long-term unemployment, those are people unemployed over 6 months, fell below 1.5%. Today, that's 2.6% of Americans. That is over 1 million Americans. What are we doing? Who are we? That's what I asked myself around the holidays. We had a lot of cold weather and snow, typical Chicago in some ways, and people are celebrating and still going out and shopping and Christmas lights and Christmas trees. And I was picturing, I know some of those families for whom this was just so bleak and so unnecessary that we could have, in 5 minutes before we left here, just extended those unemployment insurance benefits. And you've got that sign there that says each week that we failed to act, 72,000 more people. That's a pretty hefty small town of people will lose their benefits. people who only are qualified for those benefits if they are seeking work. 3 people searching for every job that's available in this country. We heard from you talk to people who have experienced this ultimate sense of insecurity. What's going to happen to me and my family? What I hear at the end of that sentence, when I talk to people at the end of the story, is, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. For many people, the fear of homelessness is just right outside their door right now. And so I don't get it. These are, you know, we celebrated and I mean celebrated the 50th anniversary of the announcement of the war on poverty and all the things that we did and that were supported for many years. Are we out of time? Oh,
Gentleman's time has expired.
Again, sorry. I apologize. Thank you for enabling me to use up your time.
No worries. Well, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. We appreciate the time.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Missouri, Mrs. Wagner, for 30 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the subject of my special order.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act, a bill that forces the federal government to notify individuals if their personal information has been stolen or unlawfully accessed through an Obamacare exchange. Since the disastrous rollout of Obamacare on October 1st, we have heard story after story, Mr. Speaker, of security threats and privacy concerns with the troubled Obamacare insurance exchanges. From the Chief Information Officer at CMS claiming that, and I quote, "There is also no confidence that personable identifiable information will be protected," to an administrator at CMS saying that the Obamacare website, and I again quote, "exposed a level of uncertainty that can be deemed as high risk," to a computer security expert calling the Obamacare website a hacker's dream. It is clear that the Obamacare exchanges were never ready to be launched. And it's unconscionable that this administration would expose millions of Americans' personal information to cyber threats and identity theft. To make matters worse, there are laws already implemented that require private companies to notify innocent victims of these security breaches. But President Obama didn't think it was necessary to live by the same rules as the private sector, and decided to push his failed agenda despite senior government officials warning him that his website was not safe for the American people. Every day, Mr. Speaker, I hear from far too many hardworking families in Missouri's 2nd District who have seen their premiums skyrocket, wages decreased, insurance coverage canceled of late, and hours cut back at work. These families are already suffering from the harsh realities of Obamacare. And to make matters worse, they have no idea whether their personal information has been stolen or not. Just recently, Mary Ann Schaefer wrote to me from Kirkwood, Missouri, about how worried she is that her most intimate information could be stolen from the Obamacare exchanges. And I quote from Mary Ann Schaefer of Kirkwood, Missouri, "I am concerned about the security of my sensitive medical records in a big government database." Mary Ann is just one of the many people I hear from in St. Louis region that are worried about the devastating consequences of Obamacare. While the only way to truly protect the American people from Obamacare is by replacing it with free market-based solutions that expand access without destroying our economy, putting the federal government between you and your doctor, and lowering the quality of our care, the federal government, Mr. Speaker, should at the very least be required to report any security breaches on the Obamacare website to those innocent victims who, through no fault of their own, trusted a government that deceived them. Since President Obama decided to delay the implementation of Obamacare for unions and businesses for an entire year, don't you think the least he could do is tell hard-working Americans if their personal information has been stolen or breached? Mr. Speaker, the simple truth is Obamacare is wrong for the American people. It is wrong for hard-working Missourians, and it is wrong for the people of Missouri's 2nd Congressional District. And it needs to be replaced immediately before any more of its harmful provisions are implemented. I urge my colleagues to vote yes, a resounding yes, on this common-sense measure. I would now, Mr. Speaker, like to yield to my good friend, Representative Diane Black, who has not only spent countless hours championing the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act, but who has tirelessly worked to improve our nation's health care as a small businesswoman and a nurse in Tennessee, and now as a member of Congress. I yield to the gentlelady from Tennessee, Mrs. Diane Black, for as much time as she may consume.
And I thank the gentlelady from Missouri, my friend and my colleague. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act, which would provide basic protections on the healthcare.gov website to help Americans protect themselves from fraud and abuse. Unfortunately, we live in a time where cyber threats are rampant, and we must do what we can to make sure the Americans are protected from these threats. John Funn, a National Review, recently wrote this, and I quote, "Christmas shoppers were stunned to learn that computer hackers had made off with the names and other personal information of some 40 million Target customers. But at least Target informed its customers of a security breach, as it is required by law. Healthcare.gov faces no such requirement. It need never notify customers that their personal information has been hacked or possibly compromised," he wrote. And what makes this even worse is that the Department of Health and Human Services was asked to include notification provisions in the final rules for Obamacare, and they declined. Because of this decision, on the part of HHS, millions of Americans' names, addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth, their email addresses, and even Social Security numbers are at risk. And if they are breached by the government, they would never have to tell them. Consider that as Americans who seek health care insurance sign on to the federal exchange, they are inserting their personal information into a website that has never had a full end-to-end security test. In fact, CMS Chief Information Officer Teresa Fryer stated in a draft memo that the federal exchange, and I quote, "does not reasonably meet security requirements, and that there is no confidence that personally identifiable information will be protected," close quote. Even worse, experts at the credit agency Experian recently warned that the healthcare industry by far will be the most susceptible to policy or to publicly disclosed and widely scrutinized data breaches in 2014. So Experian says that it is the healthcare that stands the greatest risk. This prediction was based in part on reports of security risks posed by healthcare.gov website, since the healthcare law's infrastructure was put together too quickly and haphazardly. Mr. Speaker, this website was never ready to go on October the 1st. The very least we can do is to require that the federal government notify someone if their personal information has been hacked. That way, the very least, they have a chance to fend off identity thefts and cyber attacks, and hopefully avoid another nightmare scenario like the one we saw that happened to Target shoppers. I urge my colleagues in the House to support this bill, and for our colleagues in the Senate to swiftly send it to the President's desk. Thank you, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
I thank the gentlelady from Tennessee, Representative Diane Black, for her supreme leadership in this area. This is her bill. This is her piece of legislation. It has been something she's worked on tirelessly for years and has seen its exposure at both the private sector and now, unfortunately, at the federal government level. So I thank her for her leadership. It is now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield to my good friend, Representative Richard Hudson. I thank him very much. He's a freshman member and a dear friend and colleague, a leader in our freshman class. And I thank him not only for his work on Homeland Security and the Agriculture Committee, but also for the work that he has done dealing with health care on the Education and Workforce Committee. So it is now my pleasure to yield time to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Richard Hudson, for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you, gentlelady. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I tell you, my colleague from Missouri has been a true leader in Congress, and it's a real honor to serve with you, and I thank you for your leadership, particularly on this important issue. Obamacare is an absolute disaster. We've seen disastrous impacts back home in North Carolina by the loss of jobs. I talk to folks every day. When I go home every weekend. I travel the district. I talk to businesses, and folks tell me that they've never sat on more capital. And the reason they're doing that is because they don't know what the costs of health care are going to be. And so we've got businesses out there that could be expanding, that could be hiring people, but because of this health care law, because of the uncertainty created by it, because of the rising costs, we've got business people who are not hiring. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, we're not seeing job growth like we ought to see. That's why this is the flattest, longest recession we've seen in our country's history. This awful health care law is also destroying the greatest health care system in the world. We're seeing premiums increase. I get letters and emails every day from my constituents who tell me their premiums have gone up. I talked to a woman the other day who's working 3 jobs. Her husband's working part-time because he can't find full-time work, but she's working 3 jobs just so she can pay for health care. That's before the premium increase. Mr. Speaker, we've seen so many folks who've had their plans canceled. It was said that the lie of the century is that if you like your health care, you can keep it, because people are seeing their health care plans canceled. And, Mr. Speaker, it's going to get worse, because when businesses have to start looking at whether they can afford to keep folks on the health care or not, whether the math adds up for them, whether they can afford to do that, given all the new excessive mandates, we're going to see more people lose their insurance. It's an absolute disaster. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm committed to doing everything I can to repeal this law and replace it, because at the end of the day, this is about people. And in this country, the greatest country in the history of the world, we can do better than this. We can offer health care that is the world's best quality health care at a price that people can afford, and putting people in charge of their health care decisions, not bureaucrats in Washington like this awful law does. And so I'm committed to repealing this law. But in the meantime, I urge my colleagues to support the bill that's coming to the floor tomorrow, a bill that deals with one of the disastrous aspects of this law that I haven't mentioned yet, and that is the risk to millions of Americans that their personal information can be divulged, can be stolen, because of the lack of security in the Obamacare website. This is a horrendous problem. Millions of Americans are at risk, and there's no accountability. And so what we're asking is that we put that accountability in place, that if people's personal information is lost, those folks have to be notified. The federal government thinks that businesses should live by that standard. The federal government said that states that set up their exchanges should live by that standard. Well, I say the federal government ought to live by the same standard. And if that personal information is compromised, then the individual should be notified, and the government should take responsibility and rectify the situation. And so this is simple, common sense legislation that I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, I hope our colleagues in the other body, I hope the President will support. We owe it to the American people to do the right thing, to make sure their information is secure. And if something happens, God forbid, we do the right thing and notify those individuals. And we rectify the situation. We take responsibility for it. So I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. It is the right thing to do by the American people, and I urge them to vote yes tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman from North Carolina, Representative Richard Hudson, for his leadership in this area and for giving voice to not just the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act, but to the jobs issue, which is certainly one that Obamacare has done nothing but create a part-time workforce. This is about access to care. It's about costs. It's about millions of Americans who have lost their coverage. It's about the deception of the American people, and it's about a government bureaucracy, federal bureaucracy, telling the American people what's in their best interest. You, the American people, your constituents, Congressman Hudson, they know what's in their best interest when it comes to their health care and their most intimate details, whether it comes with their personal medical records and information or whether it has to do with their costs, their coverage, their premiums, their co-pays. There is so much that must be repealed and replaced in this law, but the very least the federal government can do is to protect the integrity of their most private and personal information. So I thank the gentleman from North Carolina, and it is now my great privilege to yield to my good friend, Representative James Lankford from Oklahoma. He is our leader and our chairman on the Republican Policy Committee. He is a friend and a colleague at the leadership table, and I thank him most especially for the work that he does on Oversight and Government Reform Committee, which is, Mr. Speaker, monitoring the implementation of healthcare.gov and the Affordable Care Act. I now am pleased to yield to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. James Lankford, for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you. I thank the gentlelady. Mr. Speaker, thank you for your oversight of this evening. The gentlelady and I do not agree at all on football, she being from Missouri and myself being an Oklahoma State fan, but we do agree on this. This is a critical area, and it gets to the basic element of what we do as a nation and what a government is supposed to do. A government is designed to protect and to serve the people. The people don't serve the government. The government serves the people. Then the government is set to allow people to be able to live their lives as they choose. Then along comes the Affordable Care Act, where the government looks down at the people, literally, and says, I'm going to make better decisions for you. I'm going to, instead of you choosing your doctor, instead of you choosing your hospital, instead of you choosing your insurance, I'm going to pick a group of insurance policies and hospitals and doctors I like as the government, and you get to pick from my list and remove those choices from individuals. And then to set up a website and to say you're required to go on this website and enter your information on this website. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't know how you handle shopping online, but when I shop online, I'm careful of what websites I go to. I want to make sure there's security protocols and there's some backing to that, so I'm not entering information into some site that I don't know how the security is handled. But this one's different. This one, the power of the federal government is coming down on an individual to say, I don't care what you think about the security of this site, enter your information there. And not only enter your information there, enter your children's information there. Now, Chief Information Security Officer Teresa Fryer, she is the one that's set to be able to sign off on the security protocols for the website when it was to be launched. But in September, she refused to sign off and to put her name onto the exchanges and the data hub and say that it's ready to go and that the security is there. In fact, her statement was there was a high risk of security and there had been no end-to-end testing of this site, and she refused to sign off on the security. This is the Chief Information Security Officer that is assigned to oversee that from the government. Instead, it was pushed up to Marilyn Tavenner, the director of CMS, to have to make the sign-off because the person under her refused to do it. Should Americans be concerned entering their information? Absolutely they should be concerned entering their information, because there is still no certification that this is fully tested, fully approved, and there are not serious vulnerabilities. In the first week that the site was launched, the federal government brought in what's called a white hacker, someone that's going to come in and is going to test the system, try to hack in the system. Were they successful? Absolutely they were successful. Found multiple vulnerabilities in the site itself and then reported it back to CMS. There are a lot of security vulnerabilities there. Is this an issue? Yes. But as ironic as all that is, a government that is set up to serve the people is actually trying to protect itself and not report when there's a problem. You see, when Target had 40 million credit cards stolen, in a very rare incident for a retailer like that, 40 million credit cards were stolen, my family's being one of those. We were all notified. We were told, you're at risk. Here's what has occurred. So go change your credit card. Go protect your identity. Because Target has a responsibility to protect us and to be able to let us know you've got a risk. The federal government right now is saying, if someone breaks into our system, we have the responsibility to protect the federal government and not let anyone know, instead of protecting the individual. That is government on its head. Government is designed to serve and protect the people, not to have the people say, I can't tell you that information because it'll look bad for the federal government. No. This bill does a basic thing. It says the people are more important than the program that the government set up. The people are. And that if their information has been stolen, if there's been a compromise of that information, they should be informed of that, so that they can take the steps that are necessary to make sure them and their children who they've entered in on their site have their information protected in the days ahead. This is the right thing to do. This is not some blanket partisan issue. We would want this in every aspect of every website that the federal government has, whether that be IRS information, whether that be Obamacare information, whether that be information on an EPA computer. If it's compromised, that citizen should know, so steps can be taken to be able to protect themselves. It is a reasonable protection for the American people. That's why I think this is a reasonable thing to be able to do, to step out and say, until the days that we have, when quite frankly we believe that the Affordable Care Act will be completely repealed and the American people will have the ability to choose for themselves again, rather than have a federal government say we're going to make choices for you. Until that day comes, it is a reasonable thing to at least begin with this. And for that, I thank the gentlelady from Missouri. And again, I can't root for your football team, but I can stand with you on this issue.
Well, I appreciate the comments of the gentleman from Oklahoma, who's a good friend and leader. We won't debate the outcome of the Cotton Bowl here in the well of the floor today. That will stand on its own, on its merit. But I do appreciate his leadership on this very important health care issue. I appreciate his leadership on the policy committee for our party, and the work that he does tirelessly to communicate those in a way that is about serving the people, which at the end of the day, why we're here. Government should be here to serve the people, and we have not put the proper protections in place. What's good enough for the private sector and the states ought to be more than good enough for the federal government, and certainly the American people are worthy of these kinds of protections. And while I will say over and over again that Obamacare is wrong for the American people, it is wrong for hardworking Missourians, and it's certainly wrong for the people of the 2nd District, it needs to be replaced immediately before any more harmful provisions are implemented. But the very least that the government can do, Mr. Speaker, is require that we report any security breaches on the Obamacare website to these innocent victims who, through no fault of their own, trusted a government that has once again potentially deceived them. So, Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues again to vote yes on this common sense measure. Tomorrow, let's all stand for the American people and a service to them, a government that is not telling them what's best for them, but is truly serving their interests and serving their needs. Please stand and vote yes on the Health Exchange, Security, and Transportation Act. Mr. Speaker, with that, I will yield back the balance of my time, and thank you.
The gentlewoman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 30 minutes.
Let me thank the Speaker for his courtesies and the leader for her courtesies, for the opportunity to share on the floor of the House. And I would offer to say to my colleagues who spoke earlier that we all recognize that the Affordable Care Act has generated opportunities for 9 million Americans and growing. Let's find common ground. We have a law that is legal and affirmed by the United States Supreme Court, but it's affirmed by what is most important, hungry Americans needing good health care to save their lives and the lives of their families. And frankly, I believe that there needs to be security for all of the websites of federal agencies, rather than have bills that appear to be attacking the Affordable Care Act again after 46 attempts to repeal it. Let's find a way that we can work together to secure extensively the entire website carefully that are utilized by the federal government. But I have an opportunity, and I want to cover, Mr. Speaker, an array of issues that I think are important as we begin this new year, and I do want to wish everyone a Happy New Year. But as I do so, since I come from Houston and have been a member of the House Science Committee for 12 years before moving to Homeland Security, I want to congratulate NASA and the White House. First, NASA for the miraculous and unbelievable spacewalk just about a week or so ago of two outstanding astronauts. Spacewalks are not often done, and they are much more difficult, in fact, extremely difficult than one might imagine as you watch what seems to be an effortless, beautiful effort of activity in space. I want to congratulate them. That's science. That's genius. That is what these astronauts trained for. They are our neighbors. I was with them over the holiday, and I want them to know on the floor of the House that this was outstanding work. I want to congratulate the White House because, as many of us have advocated over the years, my colleague who is no longer in the House, Congressman Nick Lampson, and myself signed many letters to extend the life of the space station, and I'm very pleased that it is now to extend the space station for 4 years, and I'm optimistic that when that 4 years is nearing, that there will be another assessment that there is more life in the International Space Station, opportunity for major research, including when I was on the Science Committee, cancer research in particular, heart disease, stroke, aging, as our former Senator John Glenn took a second ride into space as a member of the United States Senate to test space travel on those who are aging. Congratulations to NASA and the International Space Station. It speaks to the genius of America. It speaks to the aspirations and hopes of children around the world. It focuses on the emphasis in the United States on math, technology, engineering, and science, technology, engineering, math, STEM. It focuses on teachers that continue to emphasize to our children the importance of those disciplines, and it gives us great hope. And that's a lot of what I will talk about tonight is hope. For when we think of hope, we must have a broad definition that it includes all Americans. In fact, I believe from the very moment of the dumping of the tea in the Boston Harbor, the founding fathers of this nation, in spite of all of the possible inequities, the holding of slaves, had hope. They left their places of persecution because they had hope. And we have grown through the ages, from the 16, 17, 1800s, the 1900s, that 20th century, the 21st century. It has all been around hope. We were hopeful the turn of the century, the 1900s, even as World War I was flaring. We were hopeful even as the 1928-29 collapse. We were hopeful even as the horrific, heinous acts of World War II, the internment, the Holocaust, World War II, but people were hoping that we would save people and get out of the dastardliness of that. We were hopeful in the 50s. We as African Americans were hopeful as we marched in the 1960s and 50s. We were hopeful with the Thurgood Marshall argument before the United States Supreme Court on Brown versus the Board of Education. We were hopeful. Now we come to a situation of wealth inequality. And we must assure those who fall in that gap, where they are not where they should be, not through no fault of their own, because of this increasing gap. For example, the wages of those in the top 1% making $352,900,000 plus, $352,900,000 plus, their income grew 281% from 1979 to 2007. The bottom 20%, their income grew 16%, making less than $20,000. Those making 34, it grew 23%. Those making 34 to 50, 25%. There is wealth inequality in this nation. Some would argue, well, some of that is inherited wealth. Some of that is capital gains. Some of that are stock revenue. It is wealth inequality. And I'm moved by the words of Justice Brandeis. We can either have democracy in this country or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. And that is not snatching wealth from someone who has worked hard. It is evening the opportunity for that gap, 281% growth for the 1%, and numbers like 23 and 25 and 38% for the working middle class. We need to do better. And so I think we need to start by stop quarreling about unemployment benefits extension. We did it under President Bush with no offsets, and as well for about 5 years with President Bush even acknowledging that when people work and invest in this nation and they fall on bad times, give them a transitional bridge. Some would say that our unemployment is going down. My friends, on the chronically unemployed, it is the highest it's ever been, 2.6%. Now that number is growing, 1.3 million in 2013. It'll go up to 3.6 million, 4,000 a week. So I'm not asking for the whole piece. I had a bill that said 1 year. Let's extend it for 3 months on an emergency basis and then begin to discuss how we can fund it. There are 68,000 jobless workers that are in Texas, and we expect, as it grows in 2014 to 1.9 million and more, as I said, 3.6 million growing, then it will be 106,900 Texans. And I have spoken to some of those Texans, and I have heard the stories of a welder who liked his job, was laid off through no fault of his own, needs this transitional funding so that he can be presentable for a job, or a person in technology, or an administrative assistant, or somebody who worked in home health. I believe that we have a legitimate basis, creation of 200,000 jobs, a real dent in the economy, and an acknowledgement that the unemployment rate in the United States 2012, 8.1%, and states range from 3.1% to Texas at 6.8%, Missouri is 6.9%, 5%, 5.7%, 7% in Alaska, Delaware 7.1%. It goes all over the gamut. The individuals are not able to find work because there are 3 persons looking for every job there. It generates into inequality of wealth. There is nothing that will refute this except for a transitional hand up for those unemployed, and yes, job creation. My good friends the Republicans say they passed a bill on job creation last year. Yes, they did. And we have a bill on job creation, the jobs bill. That seems to me a compromise in the making. That seems to me an opportunity for us to sit around the table and talk about technology and then talk about other aspects of job creation, because people have to be trained and retrained. This week I will introduce a bill that, if studied not as a bill introduced by a Democrat, but as studied by the study for the substance of the bill, called the New Chance for a New Start in Life Act of 2014. This is where you invest in people. It creates an opportunity for someone who is unemployed and still on their unemployment benefit. Remember, they've worked. This is an unemployment insurance, to get a stipend for certain accredited specific job training that ties to the market. Because, my friends, all of us are going to say, well, they're going to take their money and they're going to be on the basket weaving training program. Or they're going to take a truck training program and they have no license. Accredited programs. And then we're going to ask so that person can provide for their family and their training can be paid for. And we're going to work through accredited social service agencies. We're going to partner with cities and nonprofit agencies for apprenticeships and internships. Every job is not an apprenticeship. We want to work with our friends in the trades and the labor community. Unions have done well for America. Thank you for increasing our minimum wage and conditions in the workforce. Let's find a way to work together. But sometimes it's an internship in an office or an engineering company. And then to provide training and employment enhanced for veterans, because there are 22,000 veterans included in that large number of those who are needing transitional funds. To work with community colleges and historically black colleges and Hispanic serving institutions to be able to find a way to get chronically unemployed persons in the workplace, investing, paying taxes, and loving it every moment. I've talked to folks who said the most that they want for Christmas and the New Year is to have the alarm clock go off at 6 a.m. and jump out of bed to go to work. How are we going to cut these people off? What sense does it make? And then it's important to note that added the component of problems that we have is that poverty in America still exists. 49 million. Poverty rates for African Americans and Hispanics greatly exceed the national average. In 2010, 27.4% of blacks, 26.6% of Hispanics were poor, compared to 9.9% of non-Hispanic whites and 12.1% of Asians. That is not targeting quotas. It's going where the problem is. You know where else the problem is? Single women of any race, head of households. In 2010, 31.6% of households headed by single women were poor, while 15.8% of households headed by single men, 6.2% of married couple households in poverty. In my district, 18% of households in the state of Texas, first from 2009 to 2011, ranked second in the highest rate of food insecurity, and in my district, 151,000 families plus live in poverty. That is not shameful to the extent that we can't solve that problem. We've seen the poverty gap close nationwide, even though we know children still live in poverty, from President Lyndon Baines Johnson, who spoke on the war on poverty on January 8th and said that we must live for hope, as I paraphrase. And he worked diligently with programs from VISTA to Medicaid, to Medicare, to job training programs, to infrastructure programs, to programs allowing young people to go to college. I am a witness of all of those programs. Frankly, worked in the President's Summer Youth Program, in the hard rumble area of my growth. And I have seen members mention it in the last 24 hours of how they participated in the same programs. They happen now to be members of the United States Congress. I'd like to know how many Americans would call into Congress and say, I'm a beneficiary of the war on poverty, the Great Society. Why can't we not find common ground to recognize that we can be efficient, but we can also invest in people? So I raise an ancient philosopher in my remarks on this question. Any city, however small, is in fact divided into two, and the city of the poor, the other of the rich. These are at war with one another. Plato said that. And the question is, can we now in the 21st century rebut that? Can we find a way to have hopeful people who are poor work with hopeful people who are rich and find a way to enrich both of them, to give them work and to make them shining examples of what America is all about? Laying that groundwork, I hope my colleagues will join me on the Second Chance Job Act that I've just introduced, that will go alongside of the kinds of incentives that the jobs bill that President Obama has offered and the bill that was passed here in the House. Why can't we both be on the same page of caring about getting a bill passed that both bodies will look at favorably, taking pieces? Why can't we get back to legislating again? Giving and taking, making amendments, finding out what my friend on the other side of the aisle wants, finding out what we want here, having amendments being accepted, making the bill one that is not only through the regular order of the committee, but here on the floor of the House. Getting amendments that would satisfy and work with all of us. I think there is more work to do in many, many areas, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to continue now to be able to offer some of my concerns. Last evening on CNN, there was a recounting of a young lady, tragically, who attempted suicide, a young bullying victim, first tragically being raped, not being believed, and ultimately coming forward. I'm sort of summarizing the facts. And then, because this person was a star athlete in one of the Midwestern states, the town turned on this young girl and her friend. Bullying everywhere. And I think it is time for America and the Congress to make a statement on it. A simple statement. I'm not asking for much, but I've introduced H.R. 2585, the Juvenile Accountability Block Grant Reauthorization and the Bullying Prevention and Intervention Act of 2013. You'll be surprised how simple it is to be able to allow groups from all over America, 501c3s that may be under the jurisdiction of a faith institution, youth groups, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, tennis clubs, social service agencies, schools, to put their best practices forward and how they can believe they can stem the tide of bullying, what kind of intervention, and add to that cyberbullying. It also provides for gang prevention programs, turn our children towards socially beneficial pathways. I had one member say to me, what would be wrong? What would be wrong with the Congress making a unified statement that they want to prevent bullying and they want to intervene? That is the simple process, four corners of the bill. And research studies have shown that approximately 25% of school bullies will be convicted of a criminal offense in their adult years. I believe in intervention. And I'd say to my friends who are experts, all of the advocacy groups, I believe it would be very important if we came together and had this one statement that came out of the Congress, that we want parents and schools and communities and baseball clubs and basketball clubs and football leagues to understand that we've all got to pour our energy into letting children know that to live healthy and free of intimidation is a good thing, that have your fun somewhere else. I don't know whether bullying led to this absurd game of knockout, but we've got to take a stand alongside of the personal intervention that comes about through the normal community ways. Just for the record, it's important to note 30% of U.S. students in grades 6 through 10 are involved in a moderate or frequent bullying, as bullies, as victims, or both, according to the results of the first national survey on this subject. Bullying is increasingly viewed as an important contributor to youth violence, including homicide and suicide. 1 out of 4 kids is bullied. The Justice Department says that in this month, 1 out of every 4 kids will be abused by another youth. Surveys show that 77% of students are bullied mentally, verbally, and physically. We have to find a way to make a national statement. What better way than a Congress that is the symbol of the most powerful nation in the world and the most powerful lawmaking body? Why is it so difficult to pass something as simple as that? It does not stop us from looking down the future when we have much more resources to deal with, to put a huge amount of funding in it once best practices, once we give the spark plug and get people excited about our federal government is concerned about this. Let's look for enhanced best practices. Let's make a statement on this, which I think is enormously important. I want to quickly, and I hope that as we debate these issues on the floor, that there will be members who will want to have a conversation. I want to say as well that many of us have experienced violence in our communities. I'm going to discuss that a little later, but I want to say it now. I've had a number of incidences of violence through knives, through guns, in my own school districts in Houston. Even though we know that that does not define our school districts, I say to them, when you have an incident like that, it is not a reflection on you, but it is a signal and a sign that the community must come together. We will look forward in Houston to putting together a Stop Violence Commission under the 18th Congressional District, bringing people from the faith community, bringing other leaders, working with the Mothers Demand Action, MDA, who have come out every moment to stop gun violence, working with mothers and fathers who have had to bury their children, funerals that I attended over the holiday or before that time frame. I want to tell that mother whose son's funeral that I attended, I have not forgotten. We will embrace you, and we'll find a way that we can sit together and make a difference. Let me switch now for a moment. I'll come back to that issue and remind us of the humanity of comprehensive immigration reform. I said that I had any number of issues that I think are weighing on many of us as members of Congress, weighing on those of us who are doers and want to do, and I would venture to say that that is this entire body, but we are getting stalled. And for what reason, I don't know. But my hometown paper was eager to review H.R. 1417, which is a bipartisan product that has come out of the Subcommittee on Border Security and Maritime Security, my colleague from Michigan, and out of the full committee with the chairman and ranking member of the full committee, a bill that has now been joined under H.R. 15 to put a bill forward in the House. And I would just ask, why can't we end the suffering of so many, end the divide and deportation of so many families in the thousands, and begin to look as a faith community and business community, educational community, health community, research community, business community wants us to do? Comprehensive immigration reform. Texas is a prime example. 16.4% of Texans are foreign-born, 42% are Latino or Asian. 33.2% of immigrants in the state are naturalized U.S. citizens. 11.8% of registered voters are new Americans. 87.7% of children with immigrant parents are U.S. citizens. 75% of children with immigrant parents are English proficient. 70% of naturalized citizens have a high school diploma. 61,511 foreign students contribute $1.4 billion to the state economy. And they make up 21% of the workforce. 9% of the workforce is unauthorized. We need to get people from underneath the underground economy. We need families able to walk the streets together, mothers not being dragged out of homes. We need the DREAM Act children to be able to raise their heads as U.S. citizens. We need access to citizenship. And this coming Monday, I will gather at Catholic Charities with people from all over the community in Houston, Texas. And we'll be standing together, raising our voices as humane Americans. We'll be speaking about Latinos and Asians. We'll be speaking about Africans. We'll be speaking about people from the Caribbean, people from Europe, people from Canada, people from Ireland. We'll be speaking about people from all over the world that happen to be in Houston, Texas. It is time to pass comprehensive immigration reform and pass it now. I mentioned very quickly that I would be going through a number of issues, but let me just turn to the issue of guns. And let me pause for a moment and find out how much time I have, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlewoman has 3 minutes remaining.
Let me quickly mention that we must stop the violence of guns. When we think about 5,740 children being killed by guns, I'd